of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. We stand firmly against the war on science that is predicated on the appeal to nature fallacy, which is the belief that whatever is natural must be good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. This belief has become an impediment to advances in areas such as human health, social progress, and even environmental progress. In the field of medicine, the appeal to nature fallacy has already led to catastrophic outcomes. Resistance to vaccines threatens public health and the lives of children. The unwarranted resistance to GMOs has not only held back the fight against climate change, but it has also hampered our ability to feed the developing world as well. Campaigns against GMOs have also held back efforts to ward off the deadly Aedes aegypti mosquito, which has killed countless millions as a carrier of disease and plagues. The scientific consensus concerning the safety of GMOs is solidly supported in every major scientific organization across the planet. The only thing green about being anti-GMO is the extra cash that is made by overcharging for expensive boutique food. But that won't cut it when it comes to raising crops with accelerating heat stress, droughts, floods, disease, and insect infestations brought on by a hotter planet. It makes no sense to accept the call of the IPCC for decarbonization within the next 12 years and yet reject their conclusion that these goals are impossible without nuclear power, which has proven itself to be the cleanest, safest, and most reliable way of achieving decarbonization. It is the most reliable way to decarbonize simply because the alternatives of weather-dependent power sources are inherently unreliable. And nuclear is the cleanest energy source because it is the only form of energy production that completely encases its waste stream. Super safe, advanced Generation 4 reactors, which will almost completely convert existing nuclear waste to centuries worth of energy, are coming very close to commercialization. In fact, it goes completely against most everything we're led to believe, but nuclear is legitimately the safest form of energy generation according to all the accepted worldwide energy fatality data. But there is one thing that nuclear is not safe for, and that is the fossil fuel industry. The fact of the matter is that the fossil fuel industry has a long history of funding the anti-nuclear movement, along with climate change deniers, to protect their bottom line. Solid science is in dire need of a champion, and that is what eco-modernism is all about. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land, resources, and energy, enabling walkable cities that facilitates the more efficient use of mass public transit as well. It must be emphasized that our support for technological solutions is definitely not about defending industrial polluters, nor do we accept funding from corporations or industry. Nor does our defense of technology imply that we just need to sit back and let things take care of themselves. To the contrary, we believe that humanity is at a crossroads that severely threatens our future on this planet. We reject the idea of resource limits on many levels. The advance of science has a long history of getting around problems of resource scarcity and will continue to do so. Another reason is that Earth is just one of a multitude of worlds available to explore in our solar system and beyond. Comets and asteroids are untapped reservoirs for raw materials. If we could find a way to thrive in artificial ecosystems off-world, we could use what we learn to help sustain terrestrial ecosystems here on Earth. I hope by now you understand the worthiness of our cause. Ecomodernism is really only a philosophy at this time. I want to talk to you about the necessity of turning it into a movement, which will be part of the larger environmentalist movement. For it is only through our presence and participation that there can be any hope of moving environmentalism in the right direction. Our aim is not to divide the environmental movement, but rather to multiply its numbers with the incorporation of many scientific and educational communities that is working to both build chapters of eco-modernist societies and support our growth worldwide. We aspire to increase our numbers by bringing together the numerous supporters of climate action that have been alienated by mainstream environmentalism's wildly contradictory support for the shutting down of nuclear power plants in the midst of a climate emergency, and welcome them into our ranks. Thank you.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, EcoModern channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, EcoModern Society of North America.
Let me tell you something about this world I see. Let me tell you something, brother, about you and me. There's no such a thing called freedom, just a word they say. Freedom is in heaven, that's where it stays. Just a word they say. Freedom, just a word they say. Let me tell you something about this world I see. With my own two eyes, 20/20 vision. Let me tell you something, brother, about you and me.
Check.
Just a word they say. Freedom is in heaven, that's where it stays.
Hello and welcome. Sorry, let me start again. Hello and welcome to the program. This is the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabe Ignetti, Chris Bergen, and our special guest, Raul Amanchak, is the co-author of Tomorrow's Table, Organic Farming, Genetics, and the Future of Food, which he wrote together with his wife, Pam Ronald. He has been a certified organic farmer for 35 years. He was a president and board member of the California Certified Organic Farmers and worked for several years as an organic farm inspector. He received his MS in International Agriculture from UC Davis and a BA in Economics from Clark University. Welcome to the program, Raul.
Good to be here.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us. Your book, Tomorrow's Table, argues that a judicious blend of two important strands of agriculture, genetic engineering and organic farming, is key to helping feed the world's growing population in an ecologically balanced manner. So tell us about that.
Well, for the 35 years that I was waking up every morning and going to the farm, I would get to the farm and have a different sort of problem to solve, whether it was a pest problem or a fertilization problem or a weather problem. there really was nothing but problems. And as an organic farmer, I had a certain selection of tools and approaches to solve those problems. Pest problems, I had biological controls and cultural controls and genetic controls and sort of physical controls. And I would try to solve my pest problems that way. I could come in and there could be issues with plant nutrients, and I could figure out if I gave them enough compost or enough feather meal, or if I needed to use more cover crops or change my crop rotations. And I also had to deal with markets, the price of things, and whether my costs were exceeding the amount of money I could sell my crop for. And then I had a series of regulatory issues that I had to deal with, whether it was food safety issues, certification issues, and issues related to nutrient fertilizer runoff out of my fields. California has regulations that ask farmers to put together a nitrogen budget to ensure that there's not excess nitrogen being applied to their fields. So all of these problems are similar sorts of problems that farmers around the world have to deal with. Whether they're a subsistence farmer, they have to figure out how to solve their pest issues, their fertilizer issues, or if they're a 5,000 acre wheat farmer in eastern Washington, they have pest problems, they have fertilization problems. And so these are the kinds of problems that everyone has to deal with. And I had the good fortune to be able to come home and talk about issues that I had on the farm with my wife, Pam. Pam is a professor at UC Davis, and she's a plant geneticist, and she uses genetic engineering in her research. And so naturally, we would have conversations about how some of my problems, for example, we had nematode problems, and we had another pest called symphyalins, and they were very hard to control on our farm using the organic tools that we had available, crop rotation or resistant crops. And so I could talk to her or her colleagues as well, and they would say things like, "Oh, using genetic engineering, we could make essentially all of your crops resistant to nematodes, or perhaps we could develop a genetic solution to help control symphyalins." And so I was intrigued in a way that, there are opportunities here to solve specific problems on my farm that you could use genetic tools with. One of the things that I do as a organic grower is I go through seed catalogs looking for varieties that are well suited to both my climate and my soils and my pest problems. And if I can find a variety that has resistance bred into it for diseases or for other pests, then I'm more likely to choose that, because it's harder for me to control some of those pests using chemical controls like a conventional farmer would. So the idea that I could achieve, pest control from a genetic source is a really powerful one. The the funny issue about that, as an organic farmer, is you probably know that genetic engineering of any sort is banned by the National Organic Standards. And so it's not an option for organic farmers to even think about using a genetically engineered or even CRISPR solution for their pest problems. So Pam and I talked a lot about this, and she has worked on genetically engineered solutions for rice diseases and also for submergence tolerance. And both of these have been very effective ways to, in the case of the rice diseases, to reduce the amount of disease in the field without spraying any fungicides. And in terms of submergence tolerance, she did work that allowed rice that had been flooded for over 2 weeks, and instead of dying, the rice plants would survive and produce a yield. And it turned out that the genetic engineering work that she did in the lab to help identify the gene that allowed submergence tolerance, once that gene was known, then researchers and plant breeders at the IRRI, the International Rice Research Institute, they could use conventional breeding techniques to take that gene from the sort of wilder rice variety that it came in, and they could transfer it into normal varieties that people grew. And now that those rice varieties are grown in South Asia by over 6 million farmers. So it has a huge impact. So we also talked about how there are issues in conventional agriculture, the same sorts of problems that I had, but in a broader sense, where there are a lot of pesticide-related issues, fertilizer-related issues that have a big impact on the environment. And so we decided to write this book to address some of those problems and provide different approaches to how to reduce the environmental impact of agriculture and also maintain yields and hopefully provide solutions that a wide variety of growers around the world would find useful to their operations.
So a lot of questions that I got from that.
Okay.
One of the first things you said is that GMOs are banned by national organic standards. Is that going to be a big obstacle to farming in the future? Or are we going to be able to transition from those standards to something like a sustainable certifications that might be suitable for folks who want to take who want to modernize and take advantage of the bioengineered products?
I don't think organic farming standards are going to change. I think that that segment of agriculture has a market image and a market share that they want to maintain. And so one of the ways that the organic farming idea has been reinforced is by creating hypothetical disasters that genetic engineering could potentially cause. And so once you've done that for the last 40 years, you can't really go back. And so I don't think that that's going to change. I think that organic farming is going to keep the standards that it has, and genetic engineering or even CRISPR is never going to be part of it. And given how much effort and support it took to create create standards for organic farming and create a national entity that enforces those standards and maintains them, I don't see some other halfway set of standards for sustainable farmers that are allowed to use genetic techniques. I don't see that happening.
And regarding this, well, some of our prior guests suggested that simply using robust farming practices and having a robust biome made GMOs or bioengineered products unnecessary. For example, the engineered eggplant in Bangladesh being a BT eggplant, meaning it was resistant to pests from the botulism toxin that it was excreting. Is it possible that introducing that varietal could be avoided by reforming some kind of farming technique?
So organic farmers have in their quiver, they have cultural controls like crop rotation, and they have biocontrols like introducing a predator or a parasite. They have mechanical controls like you could cover the plant up with row cover, and in or genetic controls, you could have a resistant variety. And if you look at the situation in Bangladesh, these are mostly small growers who for years have been applying more and more pesticides, more and more toxic pesticides to control whatever the pest is. I'm not, it has to be a Lepidopterous pest because otherwise BT wouldn't be controlling it. But I don't know specifically which moth or butterfly it is. And over the years, I'm sure that they have developed, the insects have developed resistance to those pesticides. And so if farmers make decisions, they make a lot of economic decisions. And if these farmers are eggplant growers, it could be very difficult for them to rotate crops because the crop they're making money on is eggplant. I don't really know what their situation is, but they make the kinds of decisions on the ground that seem the most appropriate to them. And since pesticide application there isn't really covered by a lot of safety regulations, there have been a lot of pesticide-related illnesses in Bangladesh because of all the pesticides being applied without proper clothing or respirators or other regulations that apply here. So I guess I don't think that organic farming practices alone are going to help solve this pest problem enough without some help like the genetically engineered BT. But you know, you're not there, I'm not there. We don't really know what the situation is. But the fact that the growers are open and receptive to using BT eggplant indicates to me that it was a solution that was really needed.
So you mentioned these economic. Oh wait, sorry, Gabe, you have a question.
Yeah, just for the audience, could you give a short explanation of what CRISPR is?
Well, it's too bad Pam's not here because she could give a longer explanation of what CRISPR is.
Yeah.
But CRISPR is a relatively new, in the past 10 years, technique of gene editing, where the existing genome of a plant can be tweaked. Some of the genes can be removed or modified in slight ways that can improve the trait in the plant that you want it to have. So if I can't think of any great examples, but it's not as invasive or in a way as powerful as genetic engineering because it's mostly dealing with the genes that already exist within the plant. But if there are harmful genes in that plant that limit it in some way, then CRISPR can allow you to make those changes.
And there's a great story of this engineer, Josiah Zahner, who used gene editing on himself, and I think that was either a allergic reaction or some kind of a minor disability that he had. I forget what it was, but there's articles out there of these genetic scientists actually applying this technique to themselves. It's incredibly controversial to do that, of course, but
Yeah.
you think about, like, if you have a peanut allergy or no one should try this, of course. Consult medical professionals, but the people who are on the bleeding edge are taking this particularly far.
Well, one of the things that you've probably noticed is that genetic engineering or CRISPR, when it's used for human health or to prevent or control human disease, is much more widely accepted than when it's used in plants.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems, I would think just the opposite would be true, but it turns out that people are willing to accept genetic engineering on their body more easily than on the food they eat.
Crazy.
I think that of course the number one issue there, of course, is consent. And so understanding what you're doing to your body, if it's a serious enough a defect or effect that you're feeling, you would want any tool to take it away. But if you think there's two alternatives and the difference is relatively harmless, you don't see the economic benefit because you're not a farmer, it's a little
Right.
harder to intentionalize that decision. So these economic constraints, that you said that means that, for instance, the eggplant farmers might be avoiding crop rotation, and that seems to be a very serious requirement for things like organic and sustainable farming. Are there what kind of alternatives to like a monoculture crop are there that folks could take advantage of in order to reduce their input costs?
You know that so much depends on where you're farming and what you're farming and what your marketing situation is. It was very easy for me to do crop rotations because I was growing mixed vegetables in California, which one has a really long season. So basically, I could have a 3 crop rotation every year, and from year to year, move crop families around from field to field. If you're in the Midwest where you have a 3-month season and you're growing corn and soybeans for the most part, adding something else to that rotation, like even adding wheat, is complicated because as a grower, you might have a decent market for corn and soybeans, but the price you get for wheat doesn't make it worthwhile to grow. So it's very, very challenging to ask. I don't want to pick on the corn and soybean growers, but it's very challenging to ask them, well, why don't you have a bigger rotation? It would make so much more sense in terms of soil quality and pest control and all these things. And I've spoken to people who've said, well, I wanted to grow wheat, but I couldn't get enough money for it to make it worthwhile. And so going the step beyond that and saying, well, how about growing cover crops? And I think they would just roll their eyes, and say, cover crops, I don't have time within a season to grow them, and I'm not going to take a whole chunk of my field out in a financial sense in order to grow a cover crop that isn't so beneficial that it makes up for the lost income. So it's easy to propose rotations to farmers. Oh, it's such a good idea. It has all these benefits. But for them to find it economically viable is a different story.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, on economics, I was curious, are there subsidies for organics? Because I'm from Iowa. I know there's huge subsidies for growing corn. My understanding is 1/3 of the corn grown in Iowa goes for biofuels, primarily because of the subsidies.
Absolutely.
So
right.
what do you have for organics?
There aren't subsidies. Well, if you're growing organic corn or soybeans in Iowa, you have access to the same subsidies that a conventional grower would have. But if you're growing vegetables in California, you don't have any subsidies, except maybe in the sense that you're going to get a higher sales price than you would for a conventionally grown plant, a product of the same variety. So you've noticed in the store that organic broccoli sells for more than conventional broccoli, and you could just go down the list. And sometimes it's quite a bit more, and you could view that as a consumer subsidy, because you have consumers that are willing to pay more, and that's what keeps organic farmers in business, because the cost of production and the amount of labor involved is usually higher, and so if it weren't for the ability and desire of consumers to pay more, then organic farming probably wouldn't work.
Right. And are there any like obscure, hard to grow crops that would command a much higher price because so few people choose to grow them?
What do you mean by that? I uh, I
Well,
don't
I mean,
understand your question.
I mean, is there some crop that most people don't grow because it takes a little extra time to grow, but the handful of people that do grow it maybe can get a moderately higher price for that product because so few people are
Yeah,
willing
yeah,
to invest their
you
time
could
and
look at.
effort?
I had a friend who was growing um, turmeric and ginger in Hawaii, and they're both pretty labor intensive crops, but and he was growing them organically as well, and so he had a decent market for those crops, even though they're really labor intensive and not many people either choose to grow them or have the climate and environment to grow them in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Recently, there have been growers in Southern California who are trying to grow coffee in the US in Southern California, and they have a niche. It's labor intensive and it's a little sketchy on the climate, but because they can grow it, they have a local market that's interested in buying it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this controversy or this discussion we're having over whether organic foods are better than non-organic, and the argument seems to be that organic farming is less efficient. It consume or it produces less product per acre and per input cost than regular or traditional farming, I guess I could say. What's your analysis of that?
That's not so much an issue for me because I think that organic farming and conventional farming are symbiotic. And I see a sort of look on your face. They're symbiotic in the sense that the organic nutrient inputs for organic agriculture are largely coming from conventional agriculture. So the manure that organic farmers or the manure or the compost or the feather meal or the blood meal that organic farmers are applying are coming from conventionally raised animals that are fed conventional food sources. And so if these products weren't being used by organic farmers, they would be largely waste products. I mean, there's some other places they could go, but for the most part, in a weird way, organic farming is using these waste products from conventional farming and turning them into products that improve the soil and allow organic crops to grow. And so if organic farming didn't exist, you might have to invent it in order to deal with these waste products. That said, there are conventional growers that apply compost and use some of these other fertilizers, but it's generally a more expensive way to go. The other thing is that organic exists because the market for organic exists. And as long as people think that organic farming is better for the environment and building soil and better for their health, and they're willing to pay more for it, then it doesn't matter in a funny way if yields are higher or yields are lower. because there's a market for it. And this is this is kind of an aside, but as one of the reasons that I became an organic grower and continued to be one was because it is personally a way of farming that reduces my exposure to toxic elements and also gives me the satisfaction that I'm improving the soil over time. And so there are any number of reasons why organic farming exists, but I don't think it's going to go away. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to expand exponentially over time either. If you look at the percentage of farmland in the U.S. that is organically farmed, it's 1 to 2%, and that hasn't changed very much over the last 30 years. And so I don't think it's going to change too much in the future either. But I think organic farming is a necessary part of agriculture because of the nutrient recycling and because there's a demand for it.
So with only 2% of land consuming those inputs, are you saying that this will not be a closed system of input products from organic farm to organic farm? They simply won't be able to self-sustain?
They won't be able to well, it depends. In a word, no, they won't be able to self-sustain. I did back of the envelope, calculations once, trying to figure out how much manure was produced by agriculture and how much feather meal and how much nitrogen was in the system. And I also included waste from organic waste coming out of landfills that's being turned into compost. And these calculations were very crude because I don't have all the information on things, but I estimated that given the amount of organic waste that could be turned into compost or other nitrogen sources, that potentially 10 to 20% of the farmland in the U.S. could be organic if you optimized all those wastes and put them back on the fields. One of the challenges there, though, even, is that compost has a certain cost, and let's say to a grower, it's $30 a ton, but it may cost $30 a ton or more to ship it somewhere. So the farther away you are from a manure source like a chicken farm or a dairy farm or something, the more you pay. And so if you're 500 miles away, even if you want to be an organic farmer, it's expensive because buying the compost inputs just becomes so prohibitive that you're not going to do it. And there are relatively few farms today that are mixed farming operations that have both animals and plants and can provide their own manure source to feed their crops.
And those mixed operations are fairly efficient?
Well, I think, I don't know. I've never run one, but if people can make a living doing it, then it's efficient. And if they can't, it's not.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe we mentioned that you had been an inspector that certified organics.
Yes.
Could you give us a rundown of maybe a broad rundown of the categories, and did the criteria change over the years for that?
The standards for organic farming have changed very little over the years.
Hmm.
And as a organic inspector, I would go to the farm and, in a funny way, mostly focus on paperwork because organic farmers, need to keep records of all their inputs
Hmm.
and how much was applied and when it was applied and where it was applied. And they had to be very rigorous to make sure that all those inputs were allowed by the National Organic Standards Board. Um, and so I would go out to the farm, I would check the paperwork, I would check that their sales records were jived with their production amounts. And you would walk around the farm and look around to see if you could see evidence of herbicide use or uh, uh, other possible prohibited material use on the farm. And most organic farmers really do a great job of maintaining the standards and farming organically successfully. And it was rare for me over the years to find anyone who wasn't following the rules. What I would see, though, sometimes is that there would be growers who uh, struggled to farm organically and still control weeds. I inspected a number of rice growers, and rice is a curious crop in the sense that it's in California. It's often grown on ground that the water doesn't drain from, and so the only crop you can really grow is rice because everything else would have really wet feet and not do well, but rice does fine. So there would be a lot of rice grown either year after year or uh, every number of years they might take that ground out of rice, but the weeds could build up in those fields to the point where the grower couldn't effectively grow rice because the weeds were outcompeting the rice and it wasn't worth doing. So, um, my years as an inspector were interesting because I got to see a lot of different farms and see what farmers do. And for the most part, farmers were very diligent about uh, maintaining the organic farming standards.
So, are organic foods generally more nutritious? Are they a superior product?
Well, that's not really for me to determine. I think that uh, lots of research has shown that conventionally grown foods and organic foods have the same nutrient content. Research has shown that conventionally grown food uh, has low but identifiable levels of pesticide residues that are beneath the EPA's tolerances. Uh, I think for most people who buy organic food, they're buying it often because they're buying it direct from the farmer, and so they're supporting a local community member. or they're buying it because they think that organic farming has less of an impact on the environment.
And let's talk about that with the use of pesticides. Are organic pesticides generally superior? They have less environmental impact. You can apply less, and what's the alternative?
Well, all the organic pesticides are from naturally occurring sources. So whether it's plants or mineral sources, and sometimes those naturally occurring sources are of low toxicity, and sometimes they're of higher toxicity. But I think the more important point is they are one tool in an integrated pest control system that an organic farmer has. So I applied pesticides, organic pesticides every year as a grower, but it was in the context of I'm rotating crops, I'm using genetic controls, trying to find resistant varieties. I'm using mechanical controls like row cover and plastic, and I'm doing all these other things that make pesticides applications the choice of last resort. So, I can't control it with crop rotation. I can't control it with a resistant variety. I'm going to have to spray these aphids because they're destroying my crop. And so it happens. And I think it happens more rarely than on a conventional farm. And I think that the materials themselves are largely less toxic, but not always so, no.
And I guess similarly, fertilizers. Is it common that fertilizers are overused? And can you, like, with your farms, for example, could you go to no fertilizer, no inputs on that side, or was it also like a last resort thing?
Well, synthetic fertilizers, ammonium nitrate or something like that, are not allowed to be used on organic farms. Basically, our choices are things like cover crops, legumes that we could grow and turn in, and compost, which on our farm sometimes we brought manure in and made it ourselves, or we bought compost. And then things like blood meal, feather meal, other animal byproducts that an organic grower can use. And some of those nitrogen sources like blood meal or feather meal, actually blood meal, are more soluble than compost. The nutrients in compost are, as an example, and they potentially could leach out of the soil into groundwater or surface water. But the organic farm inspector, when I would go onto a farm, there are, like CCOF, California Certified Organic Farmers, has standards to encourage farmers to have an integrated nutrient management strategy, so they're not just applying blood meal to the crop, because there's a spectrum of even organic nutrients that are available and how much they can leach into the groundwater, and the standards are trying to get the grower to minimally use the more soluble ones and use more of the ones that are slower to break down, like compost and cover crops, in order to reduce that potential for contaminating groundwater or surface water.
So when it comes to having a bioengineered product, who owns the intellectual property, and are we in a situation where that becomes an issue over, your ability to acquire seeds, reuse or store seeds, or is it a potential risk where the intellectual property starts to just extract rent from farmers?
That's the answer to that is a little complex in that essentially all the genetically engineered crops are patented. There's an exception to that, or two, like the genetically engineered papaya that's grown in Hawaii is not patented and is available for anyone to use. But patenting not only is an extra cost that growers have to pay for because the company that's producing the seed can essentially charge what they want in order to make a profit, and if the grower views that as a worthwhile product, they'll buy it and plant it and make money on it, and there's the whole capitalist model there at work. What complicates things there, though? There's two things. One is it limits the ability of plant breeders to use these traits in other crops freely. And two, the other thing is that there are a lot of hybrid crops that are grown in the world. And as an organic grower, I had a tendency to grow quite a few hybrid crops because they were better yielding, they had disease resistance, or they maybe had a flavor trait or a nutrient trait that I thought was of value. And I don't know, hybrid crops, you can't save the seed from. And so you have to buy new seed every year as a grower. And the seed costs more than non-hybrid crops, open pollinated crops. But I'm not sure it's true of every hybrid crop, but the vast majority of hybrid crops, the parents of those hybrids, because hybrids are a cross between two different parents, the parents are often patented by the seed companies. And this also limits plant breeders from using that material to develop other crops. So it's not per se that genetic engineering is using patenting to protect their product, but that patenting is being used throughout the seed industry to protect their product. So it's what you say is true, that genetically engineered products are patented, but a lot of other plant varieties are patented as well.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about land use a bit, and like with this podcast being focused on eco-modernism, we're looking at how the land is used. Is land set aside for wild animals and wild plants to flourish alongside humans? We often talk about walkable cities to try to keep humans away from nature a little bit. Is there a push among organic farmers or the organic industry to, try to limit urban sprawl and protect the wilderness areas as well as your own acreage of farmland?
There definitely is. I think that organic grow, it's hard to generalize, but there are many organic growers who view their farm as a place for a variety of species in nature to thrive. And organic growers often plant hedgerows to support birds and other beneficial insects that help with their farm, but they also provide habitat for other species in the environment. And so it's, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's relatively rare, to go to an organic farm and just see bare, flat ground without any support for beneficial insects or beneficial animals or nice places just to hang out as a human being. But I think that it's hard to generalize about those things. The one of the issues that I thought you were going to bring up was that if you have a higher yielding agriculture, then you need less space for agriculture, and then you can have more land available for natural habitat,
Right.
forests and fields and things. And that's a decent argument, I think, for trying to optimize yields in as small a space as possible. Because in a natural habitat sense, agriculture to a variety of degrees is pretty destructive. If you were in Davis here and you were looking around in the valley here in California, you would notice that, God, it's awfully level. Well, it's not only level, it's laser leveled in order to irrigate the fields in an efficient way. So there's very little contours left here in the Central Valley of California. It's been flattened out for ag. And so their vernal pools are gone, habitat for different animals, the existing oak woodlands in the valley are gone. So it's, I think you can make the argument that if we could grow the same amount of food on less land, it would be better in the long run for the natural environment.
I have one more question on intellectual property. Do you get, like with the open pollination, is it common or is it possible anymore to see a patented bioengineered product cross-pollinate with an outside field, and having that cross-pollination put the neighboring farm at risk?
It seems like that very rarely happens. I haven't heard or read or seen any of that happening. And the most common crop that was talked about with that problem was corn, and the issue with corn is that corn is pollinated by the wind. The corn tassels produce the male pollen, which drifts onto the female silks at the end of the ear. And so in a strong wind, potentially, that pollen could flow onto other people's fields. And in the Midwest, well, I should say first that I have grown different varieties of corn 20 feet apart where they didn't cross. And if you if you take into account wind patterns and other things, you can minimize this. And if you had neighbors that were concerned about this, you could talk to your neighbor and say, well, why don't you plant early and I'll plant a little later, or vice versa, so our corn pollination time doesn't overlap. And it seems like growers have worked this out, because when was the last time you heard about this as a issue? It just doesn't seem to come up.
It was about 15 years ago, I think. Yeah.
15 years ago. Yeah. And then other crops, they can be pollinated in different ways. They can be self-pollinated or pollinated by bees or pollinated by other insects, and in the grand scheme of things, there are still very, very few genetically engineered crops out in the fields, and so there are no genetically engineered broccolis or melons or almost everything else, and it's actually more of an issue in California. A lot of seed crops are grown, and around us there are sunflowers that are grown for seed, and they'll plant this field with a 50-foot wide swath of flowers, sunflowers that just have the female part of the flower, and then they'll have a 5-foot band of sunflowers that just produce pollen. And the bees will cross-pollinate bring the male pollen over to the females, and you get this hybrid seed crop that is then sold as hybrid sunflower seed. Well, if you have a house within a mile of those fields and you're growing decorative sunflowers, that could screw up, a big chunk of the field. And we've had the farmer representative come around, or the seed company come around and say, your sunflowers are going to mess up our field. How about if we give you a sunflower variety that doesn't do that? And they'll give us a male sterile sunflower variety that we could grow for decorative flowers, perfectly fine, that doesn't mess up their field. And so I think that there's farmer cooperation that makes some of these interfaces work.
So tell us more about Tomorrow's Table, and what's your best outcomes for our future when it comes to the future of food and bioengineered product?
Well, first of all, I think Tomorrow's Table would have been a better book, and we could have developed this integrated concept better if we had a third partner who was a conventional farmer. It would have been awkward around the house, but I think that it would have been a better book, because we don't talk a lot in the book about the benefits of conventional ag and the way that it works, and that voice needs to be in the conversation. The book we wrote, I think, was as idealistic a view of the future of ag as organic farming is, maybe even more idealistic, because it has something that in it that offends both organic farmers and conventional farmers, because it's trying to make changes there that due to economics or ideology are very hard to make. But all that said, I think there are ongoing problems in agriculture that are challenging to solve, whether you're a subsistence farmer in Africa or you're a corn and soybean grower in Iowa. You have issues of pests and drought and flooding and whatever that need to be solved, and a lot of those problems could be solved and addressed with genetically engineered or CRISPR solutions that, if you're not allowed to use them, are really going to impede agricultural production in the future. And if in the U.S. right now there's about 200 waterways every year that are contaminated with agricultural runoff, nitrates, phosphates, and it impacts water supplies, it impacts the fishing industry, it limits recreational opportunities, and unless some agricultural farming solutions are implemented, then those problems are just going to get worse and worse over the years. So changes need to happen, but I'm not sure how quickly they're likely to happen. But people keep talking about it. People keep doing research, and we'll see how things evolve.
Great. Thank you so much. If you'd like, you can tell us anything you like now about your future products, social media, blogs. Let us know where we can find you.
I'm mostly here at home, and am not a media person, media savvy person, or media person at all. But if you look hard enough, you can find me.
Well, I'm thankful for that so much.
Good.
Thanks, everyone, for all your contributions. This has been the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. You can find us just about every Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Eco-Modernist Channel on YouTube, or at Eco-Modernist1. You can also find us on Facebook at the Eco-Modernist Society of North America, and on our website at ESNA.earth. That's ESNA.earth. I also rebroadcast this to my personal Twitch, Soyaddle, twitch.tv, Soyaddle, or Soyaddle.tv, to my x.com account, Carl Alex Pauls, and on my personal LinkedIn, Carl Pauls. Remember, everyone, emissions first, peace and justice follows.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe humanity should not be rejecting technological progress, but rather separate our impacts from nature through the responsible use of technology and urbanization. Urbanization is an unstoppable worldwide trend and the best solution to many environmental problems. It offers sustainable development for the human population and is a historic antidote to both deforestation and species extinction as humans move away from using wildlife as their protein source. Vertical, urban, high-rise architecture minimizes the use of land,